Just a brutal night for the home team as the Canucks on the wrong end of a 5-1 Boston beatdown. So much to talk about. Let's get into it on Rink Wide Vancouver. And we welcome you inside the Rink Wide Vancouver studios in downtown Vancouver on a night that saw the Boston Bruins skate circles around the Vancouver Canucks. 5-1, the final score. It was bad from the start. It didn't get any better from there. It's Jeff and it's Harm with you, and we'll get Harm's thoughts on this one. And there is so much to dissect. Not just the X's and O's of the hockey game, but the spirit of this group following up arguably its best performance of the season in the 4-0 win over the Stanley Cup champs from Florida the other night, and then just absolutely roll over for Brad Marchand and the Boston Bruins. Rink Wide brought to you in part by Bet365. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Be sure to use code NATION when you open an account. And the YouTube chat already going wild tonight, as you can imagine. If you want to make sure that your comments get read here and get right through to us on Rink Wide, our Super Chat charity partner this season is the BC Mental Health Foundation. If you want to make your question or comment get through, hit us up with a Super Chat. Proceeds will go to the BC Mental Health Foundation, changing the face of mental health and addiction by supporting breakthroughs in care, public understanding, research, and knowledge exchange. 5-1, Bruins defeat the Vancouver Canucks. Canucks are 15-9-5 now, 29 games into the season. But of more concern, Harm, I think, again, we've talked about it so often this season, is that home record that has them with 5 victories in 16 games, now 5-7-4. We saw a brutal performance against the New Jersey Devils. There have been some other ones, but this one's right up at the top of the list, and there is nowhere for anyone from the coach on down to hide after this kind of performance.
Yeah, and what's so alarming, it isn't just that they're losing these games. It isn't just the record. It's how many of these are blowouts where it feels like the Canucks have had zero chance, give their fans nothing to cheer for, and are just totally out of it. I mean, the Devils game was an embarrassment. The 7-3 Oilers one was an awful showing. This Bruins one, the Islanders game last month, and that Islanders game was also, they were starting their backup goalie, didn't have all 3 of their left shot defensemen, no Matt Barzal, no Anthony Duclair. It's also especially frustrating because, as you alluded to, they came off such an impressive performance against the defending Stanley Cup champions, and you saw a lot of the ingredients in that game against Florida that started to resemble the team that was so successful on home ice last year, as far as that defensive identity, that forecheck, good defense leading to some offensive chances as well. And you really feel for Thatcher Demko as well. His second start, and again, they absolutely lay an egg for him.
Yeah, and he was part of the problem. He wasn't anywhere close to good enough in this one, and you cut him some slack, obviously, after all he's been through. But 2 games back, has yet to post a victory. Got the single point in overtime and was forced to make some key saves against the St. Louis Blues. And here, the breakdowns happened before the goaltender, but I'm sure he'll be beating himself up that the re-entry to the National Hockey League has been a little rockier than he would have hoped. Again, it's just 2 games, but, he wants to push Kevin Lankinen. I'm sure Demko wants more starts, wants to get his game back to the level that it has been in the past. Last year when he was a Vezina finalist and looking like he's working off some rust, I thought maybe his best play was when he charged out to beat David Pastrnak to the puck there in the second period, although I think Canuck Nation probably holding its breath a little bit. You don't want to see Thatcher Demko getting in a foot race and ultimately some sort of collision along the side boards. We do a stat that stands out, and we'll get to ours a little bit later, but the high dangers were 12-0. 12-0, Harm, in the first period, and it felt like that. A brutal start for the Canucks. They take a penalty. Tyler Myers cross-checks. And he got his money's worth. People have lamented the fact that the Canucks don't clear the front of the net. Well, he cleared the net, but takes the penalty, and the league's worst power play. They just start to snap it around. Didn't look like the 32nd ranked power play in the National Hockey League, but Canucks got drawn out of position. Noah Juleson among those that, leaving others. Carson Soucy comes flying across, and wouldn't you know it, there's Brad Marchand, of all people, at the back door all kinds of time. His 13th of the season, and that sort of set the tone. And as I said, it didn't get any better from there for the Vancouver Canucks, but as we go back to that opener, and it looked like it was going to stand up as the game winner until Max Sassin scores the only Canucks goal. But what did you see on the Canucks penalty kill on the Marchand power play goal?
Yeah, I mean, right off the bat, a little bit of an unfortunate bounce where the Soucy clear didn't work. And initially, my thought was, look, if you're in that position, you got to get the puck out. But watching the replay back, the clear was supposed to hug the glass essentially, and if it had hugged the glass, it would have gone out. But instead of hugging the glass, it took a weird bounce off. I think it was a stanchion, and so Charlie McAvoy was able to keep it in the zone. And then from there, you just can't allow that that cross seam pass from down low there. That's the actual breakdown where Soucy was at fault there. And I mean, it's never a good sign for the start of the game when the crowd is booing Brad Marchand. He scores right away, and he's taunting the crowd there.
Yeah.
I'll also say this. I think the first 10 minutes of the game or so, even leading up to that Bruins power play, I thought Quinn Hughes was off the mark. And this isn't me trying to point the finger at him by any stretch of the imagination. He's by far the team's best player. And even during what you'd consider an off night for him, he was still creating, he was still trying, he was still noticeably skating and making some things happen. But first shift of the game, for example, he fanned on a pass at the point which ended in offensive zone possession. Then in the lead up to that Myers penalty, he iced the puck late in that shift. They got trapped there. Bruins were starting to create chances. That's where they take a penalty, and it leads to that first goal against. And so I think it also hurts when the guy that they've leaned way too heavily on, when he isn't driving the bus the way that he usually does at the start of games. I think that certainly had an impact too.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And he dazzles us almost every night, but you can tell because he's raised his game to such a standard, when it's not there, it sort of jumps out. And there was a play in the second period where he thought JT was going to kind of, the Hail Mary, and Quinn ends up firing at the length of the ice, and JT pulls up, and it's just an easy icing call. And you could just sort of feel it was those types of plays throughout the night that they weren't on the same page. Their best players clearly didn't have it. And at the end of the night, David Pastrnak, basically a one-man wrecking ball, a goal, and 3 assists. So Pavel Zacha had a goal and 2 helpers there. 2-0 after the first period. And we've seen this from the Canucks, even on the homestand. Columbus, down 2-0. Canucks had lots of time, and they got their act in gear. And I guess that was the troubling part in this game, was there was no spark. There, if Quinn didn't have it, who's next on your list? Like, JT's back now. It's been a couple of games. He didn't have it. Didn't have a shot on goal in this hockey game. Took the penalty. Coming to Quinn's defense, I think he had 7 hits. That's fine, but he just didn't look like he was engaged. Some of the other guys, looked to Kiefer Sherwood to be a bit of a spark plug. Quiet night for Dakota Joshua, one of their bigger bodies. I mean, we can go down the list here. It was a terrible night across the board for the Vancouver Canucks, so not really fair just to throw out a handful of names, because I could just read the roster essentially. And where the depth guys were so good and set the tone the other night against Florida, and this was a role reversal. It was a rough night at the office. I know Max Sassin scored his first, and we'll give him some credit for that, but his line absolutely caved on the ice for a couple of the Boston goals. Brandstrom and Friedman, people were wondering, they wanted to see Brandstrom back in the lineup. Forbort had the flu, so he didn't play. It was a tough go for Friedman and Brandstrom. A couple of bad bounces as well, but where depth sort of helped the Canucks the other night, it hurt them in this hockey game.
Absolutely. I mean, you look at the Morgan Geekie 2-0 goal. I mean, first of all, Danton Heinen probably should have been able to win that race to get to the puck first in the defensive zone. But even after Boston started to control possession and Pastrnak had it behind the net, just a lack of communication where both Friedman and Brandstrom sort of chase Pastrnak behind the net. Geekie's wide open in the slot. Those are just the types of egregious breakdowns that this Canucks team didn't show very often last season. And I think it shows even in the 3-0 Zacha goal, right? A theme where Rick Tocchet always speaks about how, as a 5-man unit, when you're on the ice, you can't compound mistakes. Mistakes are going to happen. Isolated guy's going to pinch in a spot or turn a puck over, but it's on the other skaters on the ice to ensure that it doesn't lead to a complete breakdown. And on the Zacha goal, prime example of the Canucks compounding mistakes, where Friedman pinches, puts himself out of position. But even from that spot, the Canucks should have been able to recover and ensure that they didn't allow a grade A chance, but instead both Pettersson and Susie sort of converge along the boards, and Zacha has tons of time and space to walk straight down Main Street on Thatcher Demko. So just a game where they weren't connected at all defensively. It felt like the communication was off, and yeah, they're depth players. I mean, I can't even say the depth players. It feels like I couldn't really point to a single skater up front or on the back end that I thought really had a good performance.
No, yeah, and you're not wrong in that, and you're right. It's probably not fair to single out those guys, but they had one of their best nights. Like Danton Heinen's really had a tough go. Liked his performance the other night. Obviously scoring a goal, sort of gravy, but I thought he did a number of things that you want to see from him, and it was a tough go for him. Teddy Bluger with a turnover that led to the McLaughlin goal, the bad bounce off Brandstrom there. And that fourth line, if you will, as I just look through the final numbers, on the ice for two of the Boston goals. So, yeah, they contributed the other night, didn't contribute. That line didn't. Sassin scores out there with JT Miller. The blender came out early, and Rick Tocchet could tell that things weren't going for his team. Nils Höglander didn't last long with Miller and Besser. Connor Garland got that opportunity, and then from there, in fact, we saw the defense pairs split in the first period as well. The coaching staff basically had seen enough in the early going, but I think some of this has to fall on the coaching staff too. Like, yes, Rick Tocchet was coach of the year, everything right for him and the hockey club a year ago, but these slow starts, the lack of spark, the continual subpar performances on home ice, like the coach can't be absolved of any blame as well here. Like, there's enough to go around, and so I'll be curious to hear Rick Tocchet's comments. He's already apologized to the fans once. That was after the Islanders game, and I would think that like the Devils have Stanley Cup aspirations. You can understand how the New Jersey Devils can run a team out of the building. You may not like it, but you can get it. The Bruins lost 8-1 in Winnipeg to start the road trip. 5-1 in Seattle the other night, their only goal coming on a penalty shot. So, okay, maybe they kind of, who knows, what Joe Sacco said to his group, but they're pros. You could expect that it was going to be a better effort. Like, I didn't think the Bruins were great in this hockey game. Like, I thought this was more a case of the Canucks being just terrible. And, there have been some questionable performances as the season has gone along. They haven't been flat out terrible often. I mean, we single out some of the performances, but man, this one on a Saturday night, there's only a couple of Saturdays before Christmas. You would have expected that the building had some jump. The Bruins aren't what they were. The rivalry isn't what it once was. But man, it was quiet in there again, and we talked about that. The champs came through on Thursday. There were a lot of empty seats. Like, I think this is becoming part of the story too, that the home ice record, I think it's being reflected in the fact that, supply and demand. Like, you got to give people a reason to come out and spend their hard-earned money. And they've got lots of ways to spend it. And it's not cheap to live in this city. And I think that we have sort of reached a tipping point here with the idea that there are enough people that want to get off their wallets and get out to see the Vancouver Canucks, because they're just not getting their money's worth from the home team. 16 games now at Rogers Arena and just 5 victories. And of those 5, the Blackhawks, the Penguins, the Flames at the tail end of a hellish part of their schedule, a Columbus team that, had 3 road wins, I think, when they came through here. So haven't exactly knocked off a ton of really good teams, and that's why the Florida win the other night sort of stood alone, and you wanted to believe, Harm, that this was the start of something. Alas, one step forward and one big step back.
Yeah, and also just to continue on that point about the fans, I think there are more than enough fans that want to go to these games, just not at these ticket prices. That's something that has really stood out to me. I've intermittently looked throughout the season. I mean, the game where Edmonton first came back, of course, you'd expect there to be a lot of demand. That was a Saturday night game, rematch of the second round of the playoffs. But the cheapest ticket to get into the building when I was looking right before puck drop on Ticketmaster, and I'm talking for like nosebleeds, was $200 a pop. And I remember having conversations with some friends that really wanted to go, but they're like, at $200 a pop, you can't really justify it. And then you compound it with the team having so many listless performances on home ice, and even just the other day, I was looking out of curiosity. Upcoming, I was specifically trying to find a game on the calendar that you'd think would be like a less desirable matchup that would be sort of a cheap ticket night. I found a midweek game against the Ducks, and I was like, okay, you'd expect, tickets to be a little bit more reasonable for that type of game. Again, nosebleeds on Ticketmaster for $80 a pop. That's expensive, and especially if you're a family of 3 or 4 people, and it doesn't even account for transportation, parking, food and drinks. Like, it's, especially given how much inflation and all these factors just outside of hockey have impacted the everyday person, it's become really, really expensive. And I know to some extent the teams played well, but I think that has a huge reason as far as why you're seeing more empty seats, beyond just the on ice performance.
Well, and look, it's entertainment. It's supposed to be fun. People want to go to have something to cheer about, and this home team just hasn't given them much at all. We talked about the home ice record. KP in the YouTube chat says, Canucks tickets for a Christmas gift? Sounds like a terrible idea right now. And it'll be interesting. Colorado comes in to wrap up the homestand. That's not going to be easy. The way that Nathan McKinnon and Rantanen are going, and you want to believe that Hughes and Makar will be worth the price of admission. Again, another bounce-back game. How many bounce-back games can you have in the first 30? But that's where the Vancouver Canucks are. And then out on the road, Utah and Vegas on back-to-back nights. So, this next stretch of the schedule for the Canucks is going to be difficult. And this was one of the gettable games, at least on paper. Bruins had other ideas. And full credit to them. Let's get to the 3 stars of this hockey game. And as you can imagine, a clean sweep for the Boston Bruins. The 3 stars, as selected by the Hockey Night in Canada crew, Pasternak, Zacha, and they go with Morgan Geekie, who did have a goal and an assist, and his goal turns out to be the game winner. We'll go Pasternak, the 4-point night, Zacha, a goal and 2 helpers, and Jeremy Swayman, who allowed a career high 8 goals in Winnipeg the other day. This was his bounce-back game. Wasn't tested that often, although in the second period, as I look through my notes, Teddy Bluger had a pretty good chance set up by Carson Soucy when it was 3-0. Connor Garland with a one-timer in the slot, had to be sharp there. Kiefer Sherwood was alone right on the doorstep, kind of a spinning backhand. So there were some opportunities for the Vancouver Canucks, and Swayman did his part, and he ends up getting the victory. And they said on the broadcast his first win against the Vancouver Canucks in the National Hockey League. So there you go. Pasternak is the first star, Pavel Zacha star number 2, and Jeremy Swayman is the 3rd star. The 3 stars here on Rink Wide Vancouver are brought to you by Greta Bar YVR. Man, we've talked about it a lot. I drove past it on my way in. I'm sure that people were there excited for the hockey game. I don't imagine that the atmosphere was rocking the way that it is some nights, but it's always fun when you're at Greta. And if you haven't checked it out, you got to check it out. We always tell you about all the big screens, the arcade games, terrific new street food menu, weekly drink specials. Had a Canucks Army watch party there in October, and there's talk of another one early in the new year, so stay tuned for some details on that. Greta Bar, the place to be, 50 West Cordova. Greta Bar, let the games begin. All right, he was the story the other night because he returned to the lineup after missing 10, jumped back in with 2 assists, and, he thought, all right, great re-entry to the Vancouver Canucks, and hopefully he can build on that. And we talked about the fact that JT Miller does set up Max Sassin. It's a night that Sassin won't ever forget. It's a tough circumstance to score your first one, and I thought, he didn't try to oversell it. He recognized that it made it a 5-1 game midway through the 3rd period. But JT Miller does pick up an assist, so he's got points in the 2 games since his return. What did you see, or what didn't you see out of JT Miller tonight, Harm?
Yeah, he was trying to throw the body. I think some games it's difficult to evaluate sort of individual players in the sense that I think so many of Vancouver's issues in tonight's games started with how many issues the Bruins forecheck gave the Canucks on zone exits. And in an environment like that, where your back end can't move the puck, it is a lot harder to make an impact as a forward. And that's not to absolve JT Miller of blame necessarily, because yeah, you would have liked to see him dictate play a little bit more, maybe help engineer zone exits himself by coming deeper in the defensive zone on occasion. But I didn't necessarily look at him and go, "Oh, he's turning a bunch of pucks over. He's the reason that the line as a whole isn't producing." It felt more as if, okay, it's been quiet for him, but I think a lot of that was environmental, where just as a 5-man unit, whenever he stepped on the ice, they were ineffective at advancing the puck up the ice and just didn't have many touches in dangerous offensive situations. I also think there were a couple of sequences where I noticed, okay, the Miller line, they look like they got some legs on the forecheck, where that's the other part of the story is when you can't exit the zone properly, it's hard to get your forecheck established because there's no gas left in the tank because you've been defending the whole shift. But on the few occasions where the Miller line was able to, F1's got speed, F2's got speed, the Bruins did a really good job, I think, of breaking out against JT Miller's line and escaping that pressure. And I think that's part of why it was maybe difficult for that line and the team as a whole to stack a lot of threatening shifts in the offensive zone.
The final numbers for JT Miller, 19 minutes and 10 seconds, so almost 5 minutes more ice time than his return to the lineup the other night. He has the assist, takes the penalty, coming to the defense of Quinn Hughes. No shots, just one shot attempt. 7 hits, so he was trying to be physical. And, this is an area that I thought maybe it would take a little bit of time to readjust, but 12 and 7 in the faceoff circle. And so that helps because the Canucks certainly missed him on draws when he was away from the hockey club. You would love to see Elias Pettersson have a big night here. One of these nights, now that JT is back, I think people are saying, we saw it certainly when JT was out of the lineup, and people thought, okay, there was a correlation there that there was an uptick in Elias Pettersson's performance. JT comes back. Petey was quiet the other night against the Florida Panthers in the win, and as quiet, if not quieter, in this one. I don't want to say cause and effect. I'm not ready to buy into that narrative just yet, but 15 minutes and 10 seconds of ice time, couple of shots on 4 attempts, gets absolutely crushed in the face-off circle, just 4 of 16 on the draw for Elias Pettersson. So rough go there, and on the ice for a couple of the Boston goals. So had a variety of line mates as Rick Tocchet started to move pieces around, although for the most part it was Debrusk and Sherwood with Elias Pettersson. Man, they just need a whole lot more from Elias Pettersson on nights like this one and most nights as they go forward here. I don't know. Disappointing. Certainly, again, across the board disappointing. But you look at your best players. We said it was an off night for Quinn. We just talked about JT Miller, and there wasn't a whole lot in Elias Pettersson's game here against the Bruins.
Yeah, his game overall, of course, has been trending in the right direction over the last 6 weeks or so. But one element of his game that I want to see and that I'm looking at as a sign of, okay, this is Elias Pettersson when he's at his best, is his ability to transport up the ice and look dynamic through the neutral zone, make a lot of plays off the rush. I think that's a big part of what defined his 102-point breakout season a couple of years ago. Was it felt like Pettersson's line was different in that, okay, all the other 3 lines, they weren't really able to generate much off the rush, but you could lean on the Pettersson line to really consistently play with pace, play with speed through the neutral zone and look threatening in that type of environment. And I just don't see Pettersson driving a lot of dangerous zone entries. And look, he's never going to be Connor McDavid or Nathan McKinnon in that realm. We know that, but that's, I think, a hallmark of when he's at his best is you're at least able to see him take defenders on, beat guys one-on-one, see him with create space with his dekes and separations. And when he has the puck, it's like he's able to draw defenders towards him like a magnet. That's Elias Pettersson when he's at his best. And I think the last couple of nights, for sure, we haven't seen that out of him at all.
Just checking some comments from Rick Tocchet post-game. He said the first period we iced the puck 4 times when we shouldn't have, and it led to 2 goals. I saw some guys a little bit nervous early. And he said the icing's inexcusable for all of us. That to me just gives the other team a lot of juice. You mentioned the icing that, again, we just don't see that from Quinn Hughes, and maybe a real early indication in the hockey game that the captain, again, wearing the bubble, and it hasn't held him back. I do wonder how much longer he's going to have to go with full face protection, but I don't think that it was a bubble that affected his ability to ice or not ice the puck. It was just one of those plays that happened, and ultimately the Boston Bruins able to capitalize. Again, I don't want to take anything away from the Bruins. They played a nice road game. They got the lead. They built on it. But we focus on the Vancouver Canucks here, and I do think it was the Canucks' performance certainly that played into the way that this hockey game unfolded. And again, no response. You can't always control whether you score the first one. Other teams trying to open the scoring, other teams trying to extend its lead, but you can control your response. And there's just been too many nights here, and too many of these periods. Like Columbus outshot the Canucks 17-2 in the first period. I was just making notes here. Tampa 18-5 edge in the second period of that game. Florida the other night, even though the Canucks win the hockey game, the shots are 13-5, and here in the first period 16-4, and it just feels like the Canucks don't have that person or persons that are able to turn the tide in hockey games and sort of stem the momentum. We know the coach doesn't like to use his timeout early in hockey games, wants to save it for strategic reasons for later. But I just, at some points, I do wonder when once the puck's dropped, the coach doesn't have a ton of options available to him to try to change momentum. He can do what he did, which was mix up some of his lines, change the defense pairs. You can bench guys, whatever. But the timeout sometimes, like I thought Chris Knoblauch in that Edmonton game, the Oilers were up 3-0 on the Saturday night here in November, and the Canucks scored twice. And I thought that was a perfect use of a timeout by a coach just to settle his team down, to let them know that this game was starting to slip, and then the Oilers roared away, and they end up winning by a score of 7-3. So I'm not saying that the timeout would have changed this hockey game, but it is obvious that Rick Tocchet, that's just a tool that he doesn't want to go to earlier in hockey games, wants to keep that in his back pocket. But that's where I say, the players are the guys that play the game. They weren't good enough, but ultimately there's a fair bit of heat on the coach. I don't know if you're seeing it in your socials as well, but there does seem right now, this is the coach of the year. We're not even at 30 games since he won the coach of the year award, and seeing a lot of people that seem to think that it's, a lot of this is on the coach.
I don't necessarily agree with that. I think part of it is just that they overachieved last season. Everything went perfectly right for him, and this is sort of what happens. You want to know why so many Jack Adams winners get in trouble and often get fired shortly after? And I'm not suggesting that Tocchet's on the hot seat by any stretch of the imagination, but it's because to be a Jack Adams winner in the first place, your team blew all expectations out of the water. And sometimes what happens is now you've created this new bar for the level that everybody expects your team to perform at. And maybe it's just that to a certain extent you overachieved, and when you come back down to earth a little bit, then the heat falls back on the head coach. And to me, has Tocchet been perfect this year? Absolutely not. I look at the biggest area that he's maybe struggled in is as far as just helping the team take the next step as far as big picture philosophically with the playing style. And what I mean by that is last year they took on this clear identity of we're going to be defensively stingy. We're not going to give up anything off the rush. We're going to clog the slot. We're going to dictate what the forecheck. All our forwards have to be dogs on the back check. And part of the limitations of that, and we saw that in the second half and through the playoffs, was they just weren't creating enough offensively. And so that was a huge storyline heading into training camp, of course. And the preseason was, Rick Tocchet was mentioning how he wanted to open things up a little bit, find ways to create more off the rush, and be a more dynamic, dangerous team offensively, because that's ultimately the step that this organization needed to take to be a legit cup contender. And instead of just being this plucky, we defend well, but we're going to need some bounces offensively to do damage in the playoffs. And I think it's been that transition where Tocchet in the team, there have been clear growing pains where you look at the underlying numbers, and Vancouver still grades out as one of the league's worst teams as far as generating 5-on-5 expected goals, 5-on-5 shots. Their underlying offensive profile is still a concern, and yet the defensive play has slipped. right? Defensive identity. It's like it's like defensively they're giving up a lot more off the rush, and they're making and opponents are having an easier time creating chances, as if the Canucks opened up their system and are embracing the style of, we want to have more offensive generation, but they're not yielding any of the offensive benefits. And I think that's where they're caught in that identity right now, that hasn't been clear enough. And that's ultimately where I look at Tocchet and say, that's an area where he probably needs to be better. But big picture, I don't look at him, especially given the injuries that they've dealt with to this point in the season and their overall record. I can't point my finger at Tocchet and say he's near the top of the list of the reasons why this team has been inconsistent so far this season.
Yeah, and on a night like tonight, nobody going. His top-end guys certainly didn't have it. And then, you look at the depth defense. Noah Juulsen's in your top four, and then you're running out a third pair that hasn't played together in Brandstrom and Friedman, two guys that didn't start the season here. Derek Forbort got back the other day. He was one of the ones, along with Kevin Lankinen, that came down with the flu. Rick Tocchet said this morning that's why they scrapped practice on Friday, just keep everybody away, and then told those two guys to stay away as well. We'll see if that strategy proves prudent at the end of the day to keep the flu from spreading, because they got to play again on Monday against the Colorado Avalanche. So you hope that everybody is available. Hopefully, it's been such a tough go for Forbort. Finally gets back in the lineup and then has to sit out again. And I don't think Lankinen was going to play this one, even coming off the shutout. I think this was the Thatcher Demko game. So give Lankinen the day off entirely. Bring up Artur Silovs. That's good use of the farm system. Silov's up on an emergency basis. Nikita Tolopilo, by the way, with a shutout out in Abbotsford on Teddy Bear night. So Linus Karlsson had a couple of goals down there. Jet Wu was the Teddy Bear guy. Abbotsford with a 3-0 win over the was it the Manitoba Moose? I think it was Manitoba that was in for the weekend out there. All right, we said we want your contributions. You've heard Harm and I breaking this thing down. If there's anything you want to talk about, hit us up in the live chat or any of our socials. With more than 4,400 hair salons throughout the United States and Canada, Great Clips, the world's largest hair salon brand and official hair salon in the NHL. Salons are locally owned and operated. They're open 7 days a week. For more information, check out greatclips.com. Great Clips, it's going to be great. The Great Clips inbox here at Rink Wide Vancouver. And we do have a super chat. We told you right off the top that super chats are now available. And KC Shuffle has taken advantage and want to get to KC Shuffle's contribution to the program here. And again, super chats, proceeds go to the BC Mental Health Foundation. So thank you to KC Shuffle, who says, I think you have to consider moving Demko with Höglander and maybe somebody else for a blockbuster deal if you want to win now. Now, I mentioned that, Harm, because Jim Rutherford, timing's everything in life. He has to do after hours on hockey night after a stinker like this one. But Buck Stops, with the president of hockey operations, he said already, he's been quoted on Hockey Night tonight saying that they have to look at bringing in a couple of people if they are going to be legitimate contenders now. So, this is his time of year. We're into December. He hasn't made a trade. Loves to get the jump on the market. I don't know about Demko and Höglander in particular, like KC Shuffle says there. First of all, I think the entire league would want to take a wait-and-see approach with Thatcher Demko after 2 games back, and certainly hasn't looked like he's got his superpowers. And I don't know where it goes from here for Nils Höglander. We've been talking about that for a while. Certainly a trade chip for the Vancouver Canucks. He alone, I don't think, is going to net you a ton, given his performance of late. But when you see performances like this one, and we know the history of Jim Rutherford, do you think that there could be a knee-jerk reaction?
There could be. The challenge is, if you're the Canucks, you don't want to end up in a scenario where you're giving up, let's say, a lot for a win now piece, especially if it's a rental that might only help you for this season, before you're certain that this is actually a group worth investing in, right? You can't push your chips in every single year as far as trading first round picks and quality prospects. You only do that when you're certain that, okay, this team looks like it has a chance to contend for a Stanley Cup, and we're still in wait and see mode as far as assessing what exactly this team's potential ceiling is. So if I'm the Canucks, I would be, as much as, the back end needs help, I don't love a lot of the options that are available on the market right now, and I would much rather prefer taking a wait and see approach and seeing what exactly this team is, especially because I think a huge part too is not just the back end and seeing how Thatcher Demko looks, but Elias Pettersson and JT Miller. This team isn't going to go deep in the playoffs unless those guys are performing at an elite level. And for both guys, they haven't played at a superstar level. That's what this Canucks team needs. And I think before you, it depends, right? Look, if there was a Nikita Zadorov like trade out there where it's like, okay, you can get a number 4 or 5 defenseman, help steady the blue line. You don't have to pay a ton to do it. Absolutely go and do that. But I don't know how if that opportunity is realistically available. And if the alternative is, all right, we have to go out and make a big splash, that's where if you are going to make a big splash, to me, it has to be a player with term. It has to be more of like a Phil Hronek type trade as opposed to, say, the Elias Lindholm acquisition.
Canucks fall 5-1 to the Boston Bruins here on this Saturday night. Fifth game of a 6-game homestand. They're 2-2-1 on the homestand. And again, 5-7-4 now. 5 wins in 16 games before the paying customers, the ones that do pay the freight and show up. This was a tough one, and the homestand wraps up against Colorado on Monday. We'll talk a little bit more about the Avs in a sec, but want to get to the stat that stands out. We've thrown a lot of numbers out there already, not many of them flattering for the Vancouver Canucks, but this comes back to this home ice thing as well. Canucks have trailed at some point in 14 of 16 home games, which, like, that's mind-boggling, Harm. And I went a little further. They have trailed by 2 in 10 of the 16 games. So you talk about chasing games. Like earlier in the season, scoring first was an issue. They were better of late. They opened the scoring against Tampa. They lost that one. They opened the scoring against St. Louis. They opened the scoring the other night against Florida and obviously went wire to wire there. But 14 of 16 home games the Canucks have had to play come from behind. And one of the 2 that they didn't was against Philadelphia, where they ended up losing in a shootout, but they never trailed in that hockey game. So anyway you slice it, like, there's just not many flattering numbers on home ice, but that one's pretty damning right there when you are chasing at some point in 14 of 16 home games.
I think that also goes back to last year. There was a lot of discussion around, the PDO and how the Canucks were on a bit of a shooting percentage bender, especially in the first half. I think sequentially they were also fortunate as far as how often they scored first. And I think it's a totally different game when you're protecting a lead versus when you're obviously chasing the game. And I think last year, the Canucks' defensive identity under Tocchet, it was a perfect match where it's, okay, we scored the first goal. After that, it's not that they went into a shell, but they were really confident protecting leads. They were really confident in that, playing that style. And that is a huge reason why when it's like, you go up first, and then you have a team that defends so well, has a Vezina caliber goaltender, and had stars producing as well. Like, no wonder why they won so much on home ice last year. But then when you start trailing so often, that's where again it goes back to this team's offensive profile at 5-on-5. Just they don't create a whole lot. That's the other story. Is we've been talking a lot about how many goals the Canucks have surrendered on home ice, but in a lot of these games, they also just haven't generated anything. They haven't looked dangerous offensively at all, and that's a concern for me.
With the loss, the Canucks stay on 35 points through 29 games, so they're 15-9-5. Calgary with a shutout over Florida, so the Panthers get blanked in back-to-back games. They were without Barkov, who was under the weather. He didn't play in that one, but Calgary has tied the Canucks again, 35 points. At the end, and the Canucks have 2 games in hand, I get that. But just the fact that nearing the 30-game mark, we're talking about the Canucks being tied with the Calgary Flames, and they do have to look over their shoulder here. Utah has won a couple in back-to-back games. They've got 33 points. The Canucks are going to see them coming up here on Wednesday, the first meeting and their first trip into Salt Lake City in the National Hockey League. But I don't know if you watched Vegas and Edmonton earlier in the day. Like, that was a heavyweight battle. The Oilers have won 5 in a row. Vegas is 7-2-1 in its last 10. Like, teams at the top are starting to separate a little bit. And if you're the Vancouver Canucks, like, you're trying to keep pace here. And the 4-1-1 road trip, that was a great sign. And then you thought, okay, they're coming home. Like, if they can get it sorted out. But 2-2-1 through 5 here on the homestand, all of a sudden it puts some pressure on Monday night to be above 500 to try to get a little momentum before you get back out on that road trip, because that's going to be tough going to Utah and then into Vegas on Thursday and back-to-back. So we'll see how things shake down there. But when I just look around games that involve Pacific Division teams, the LA Kings go into Madison Square, the latest team to absolutely pummel the Rangers 5-1. So Kings keep getting it done. Edmonton and Vegas, it was an afternoon game. 6-3 was the final there for the Edmonton Oilers over the Vegas Golden Knights. Calgary with a 3-0 win at home against the Florida Panthers. Kraken fall 5-1 at home to Seattle. So Seattle, one of those teams in the chase pack that unable to get it done tonight on home ice. And Colorado coming this way for Monday night. The Avs 5-2 winners at home over the Nashville Predators. So, most of the teams that the Canucks are trying to keep pace with able to pick up points. And as things wind down on this Saturday night, Canucks are the second wild card team. So they are still above the playoff bar, but they've got Calgary and a couple other teams starting to breathe down their neck. Should they be more focused on the teams above them, or should they be paying a little attention to teams in the rearview mirror here?
I'll say this, I'm not too worried about that right now, especially because the way the Western Conference is shaping up right now, I don't think that there is, for example, even the way I view it this year is it doesn't really matter where you finish as far as are you top 3 in the division or are you in a wild card spot, because the Minnesota Wild, for example, let's say you barely squeak in the playoffs, you're wild card 2. Normally there might be a team that you're like, oh boy, you don't want to play against the first seed in the Western Conference. The first seed in the Western Conference right now by points percentage of the Minnesota Wild. So that's not really a team that scares you. There isn't a ton of stakes on whether you finish, say, in a wildcard spot or in second or third in the Pacific Division, as far as the quality of your first-round playoff opponent really changing by a whole lot. So the focus at this point is just get in, right? And from that standpoint, when I look at the schedule coming up, I view the Colorado, Utah, Vegas, where it's 3 games in 4 nights. All 3 of those opponents are pretty difficult, especially Colorado and Vegas. If they can just go something like 1-1-1 in that stretch, just bank the 3 points in 3 games. After that, their schedule really softens up for a bunch, where they've got Ottawa, they've got San Jose, they've got Seattle, they've got Calgary, they've got Seattle again, and then Nashville, and then Montreal. So after Vegas on the 19th, they've got 7 straight games against non-playoff opponents. And we know that the Canucks, for as inconsistent and flawed at times that they've looked this season, they have absolutely hammered these non-playoff teams. That's where they've really shown that next level, the next gear. So really, it's just weathering the storm for me over the next 3 games or so and making sure that you're not like losing all 3 in regulation, because there is light at the end of the tunnel as far as the schedule really softening up.
Yeah, and that is an important part of the schedule, because we don't want to get too far down, but mid-January, they've got that road trip that's going to take them to Washington, to Toronto, to Carolina, ends up in Winnipeg. So, that's coming down the pipe, but you can't worry about mid-January right now. They just got to focus on the next one, and that's going to be Colorado. And the way McKinnon and Rantanen are going, another 3-point night for Nate the Great. He's up to 50 points already, leads the National Hockey League. So he's dialing right now, and he's going to be a handful. And you just know that he's looking at the bottom of this Canucks defensive core and thinking, yeah, there's probably going to be some opportunities in here on Monday night. That's a 7:30 start, by the way, so puck drop a little later, and of course Rink Wide will be on after, but we'll be a little later than usual as well, I guess national television purposes. So a 7:30 puck drop for the Vancouver Canucks and the Colorado Avalanche. All right, let's get to our line of the night as we look ahead in the National Hockey League. This segment brought to you by Bet365, proud partner of Rink Wide Vancouver. Open an account with Bet365 and bet on a huge range of markets. Use code NATION. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. I'm looking ahead. Some fine print there if you're watching on the YouTube live stream. But I'm looking at Vegas and Minnesota. Talk about top teams in the divisions and the conference. Another heavy. What a weekend for Vegas in Edmonton. and then turning around and going to Minnesota. If you look at a map, not exactly next door to each other. So it was an afternoon game. I'm sure Vegas got into Minnesota at a reasonable time. It's back-to-back for both of those teams. Minnesota played an early game as well, beat Philadelphia by a score of 4-1. But I'm looking at Vegas. I don't think they're going to go through the weekend dropping both ends here. And something tells me that they're going to rise to the occasion. There's some value there on the money line. You can get the Vegas Golden Knights at 215. Again, back-to-back, so we'll see who's got what left in the tank there. But I'm looking for the Golden Knights to respond, so I'm taking them on the money line. That is our line of the night. All right, Monday night, first look at Makar versus Hughes. Again, we'll see if Quinn is able to shed the full face shield and get back to usual. It's been a week now, or I guess Sunday afternoon, against Tampa is when he took that high stick early. So he's been bubbled up for the better part of a week. Hasn't really impacted his play, but I'm sure he wants to get back to doing Quinn Hughes things and being able to feel the wind in his face rather than having the fishbowl effect. What do you think of the challenge in terms of Makar versus Hughes? And how much do you think these games, like, we know that Quinn's the ultimate hockey nerd. He knows what's going on. He knows exactly where he stands in relation to Cale Makar, who had an assist in Colorado's 5-2 win over Nashville. So Makar up to 37 points. That leads all defensemen. He's 3 ahead of Quinn Hughes, who didn't figure in the scoring in this one. But how much do you think Quinn relishes head-to-head with Cale Makar?
Oh, he's going to be absolutely having this game circled on his calendar, especially given the context of how poorly the team played against Boston tonight. And I'm expecting him to be firing on all cylinders. Quinn Hughes I can't remember the last time Quinn Hughes went back-to-back games where he had an off night. I'd say this was probably an off night for him against the Bruins, and I'm expecting nothing less than elite level play from him. And look, he knows that the national conversation and narratives around this race, a lot of it does, whether it's fair or not, rest on the head-to-head conversation. And to me, the Hughes versus Makar Norris conversation, I don't think nationally people have brought enough, put enough stock into how reliant Makar has been on McKinnon. Like, when you look at the underlying numbers, Makar's 5-on-5 play just falls off a cliff practically when he isn't sharing the ice with Nathan McKinnon, whereas Quinn Hughes obviously doesn't have a McKinnon caliber forward who's doing a lot of the heavy lifting play driving wise, but that nuance has been lost in a lot of the national conversation. And if people are on the East Coast staying up to watch this head-to-head contest, they'll see for themselves how Quinn Hughes can single-handedly dictate on a shift-by-shift basis in a way that, while Cale Makar has been unbelievable, I just don't think he's tilted the ice to that extent.
Updated after tonight's play, McKinnon with 50 points leads the league in assists and points, so he's got 12 goals, 38 helpers. Mikko Rantanen having an incredible season. I mean, they are one of the dynamic duos in the National Hockey League. Rantanen's up to 46 points, so he's not far off his teammate and the league lead there. And then you've got Makar at 37. Now, beyond that, we know that depth has been a little bit of an issue for the Colorado Avalanche, and they really struggled in goal. Mackenzie Blackwood, picked up earlier in the week from San Jose, made his debut tonight and gets the win. He's the 6th goaltender that they have used, and we are only midway through the month of December. So they've completely overhauled their goaltending. You don't see that in season very often, but they're moving forward with Mackenzie Blackwood and Scott Wedgwood, and that certainly feels like an upgrade on what they started the season with when they just couldn't get saves to save their life. But all of that, they were 0-4 to start the season. Since then, 18-10. So you get a sense that they are starting to figure it out. And, of course, if they can get some saves and get some goaltending, I do think that this is a team that's going to be heard from before all is said and done. But because they got behind the 8 ball early, like the Vancouver Canucks, they are a wild card team as well. So as things sit right now, it's the 2 teams occupying wild card spots that are going to meet on Monday night, 7:30 at Rogers Arena. Just before we run, we should give him his due here. Max Sassin scores his first NHL goal, a cool moment. We know how much it meant to his dad particularly, but the family. We saw the show of force in Ottawa on his NHL debut a couple of weeks ago. harm the guy kind of quietly here, but he's got 5 points in 10 games. Like, I know that he's not here to light up the score sheet, but we have seen the shuttle from Abbotsford, and a lot of guys have had opportunities that really haven't been able to make the most of them offensively. Now, they're in a fourth-line role aside from Lecker-Mackey, but the rest of those guys have really been put in depth roles. But what do you make of Max Sassin? And good for him, first of all. A night that he said afterwards, a night I'm never going to forget, scoring my first in the National Hockey League. But 10 games now. We've had a 10-game sample of Max Sassin. Is he one of the best 12 forwards in this organization?
Yeah, I think right now he is. I mean, when you look at that call-up tier of forwards, fringe, the guys that are on the fringes of being between Abbotsford and Vancouver on a full-time basis, the Atu Ratu, the Arshdeep Bains, the Nils Aman, the Jonathan Lecker-Mackey sort of tier of guys that have gotten a shot. He's been the most impressive of the bunch, not only because of the secondary production that he's contributed, but his speed, his tenacity on the forecheck, the races that he's able to win. And I'm looking forward to seeing him get a more consistent opportunity with a couple of veteran line mates now. I know Teddy Bluger and Danton Heinen had uncharacteristically off nights, but we saw in the Florida game where, and that's more of what I'm hoping that fourth line can bring, is when you've got Bluger's defensive reliability and his two-way chops, it seemed to give Heinen a little bit of lift, and Heinen was more of the player that he's typically been over his career, which is a really reliable bottom six player. And so when you have two really experienced guys that are above average fourth liners in Bluger and Heinen, it makes it easier for a guy like Sassin to kind of learn the ropes and just fit in well, as opposed to, I think there was a stretch after his first couple of games where with Atu Ratu also on that line, it just felt like that line was a little bit young, a little bit inexperienced, didn't have a distinct enough identity. But now that they have Bluger on that line, I'm hoping that all three of them can carve out a defensive identity, and I think Sassin should be able to excel in that type of role.
All right, one last one for you here. And I'm sort of envisioning Rick Tocchet and Adam Foote in their office having this giant wheel, like Wheel of Fortune, and just spinning the wheel of depth defenders and spin it twice and see who comes up for the fifth and sixth slots on Monday. And again, this is the Colorado Avalanche we're talking about. If everybody's healthy and they have avoided the flu bug, do you go back to Forbort and Friedman, or what does the bottom of the depth chart look like on Monday against the Avs?
Yeah, good question. I'd want to see Forbort back in the lineup. I thought he looked good in the Florida game. I would lean towards going Forbort and then Brandstrom on his offside as a third pair. I know Tocchet prefers lefty-righty, but I just think Brandstrom's proven more than Desharnais at this point, or Brandstrom's proven more than Friedman at this point. Because of his puck moving and just the issues that they've had on zone exits again in this Boston game. And I know that they fared well without him exits wise against Florida, but the Blues game was disastrous as well. They just couldn't get out of their own zone. And to me, I think you need, even though Brandstrom's overall form has slipped, I want to see him in the lineup, and I'd lean towards a Forbort Brandstrom third pair with Friedman coming out of the lineup.
Well, we'll see what practice brings. I imagine after a Friday off, they will be back on the practice ice Sunday. After a performance like this one, they've got plenty to practice. So we'll see what happens on Sunday, maybe get an idea of what Rick Tocchet is thinking as far as the lineup goes for Monday against the Colorado Avalanche, the end of the homestand. And one more game here to try to get things right before they pack their bags and head out on the road for the quick 2-game back-to-back road trip into Utah and Vegas on Wednesday and Thursday. If you haven't already, check out Canucks Army. Quad's got his instant reaction up after this one. His thoughts on where it got away from the Vancouver Canucks, why it'll have the Stanchies, the Statsies, a complete statistical analysis and breakdown of this hockey game that will follow on Sunday. I've got the call out for a Monday mailbag, so we're still accepting questions there. You can hit me up online on my own personal X account there if you've got questions that you want answered for the Monday mailbag. So lots going on, anything to do with the Vancouver Canucks. You will find it at Canucks Army, and I know we'll give you an opportunity. I see Drance already has his instant reaction at The Athletic after a 5-1 loss to the Boston Bruins. You don't have to write about this one, Harm?
Yeah, thankfully not. I got the Colorado game though, so
Okay.
we'll see.
We'll see what Monday brings. Always fun getting you on. Great perspective and analysis. And I know you and Quads will have lots to say on Monday when you guys are reunited for the first Canucks convo of the new week. And that's a game day, obviously. So we look forward to that. Thanks for staying up late here on a Saturday and helping us out on Rink Wide.
Thanks for having me.
There you go. Harman Dial of The Athletic and of course, Canucks conversation as well. All right, as we wrap things up here, 5-1. We've talked about it enough here. I think we've said pretty much all we can say about this one. So, again, check out Canucks Army for a whole bunch of written content. Canucks Convo Monday to Friday. Harrison Price Monday to Friday as well. And we'll be back after the Canucks and the Colorado Avalanche for the first time this season on Monday night. One more reminder, a 7:30 start. So we'll be on a little later than usual, but we will be here. Trust us. Irf will be back as my wingman for that one. So for Karin, working hard behind the scenes, and for Harm, co-hosting tonight, this is Jeff again. Thanks so much for your support. We appreciate it. We'll catch you on the next episode of Rink Wide Vancouver.